What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to remind you guys to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying this video, and if you're enjoying the daily uploads. If we could get to 1,000 likes on all these regular videos, I think that's a pretty good spot to aim for. When you do these things, it really helps the channel to grow and ensure that I can keep making these videos daily for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in these videos, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about making these videos is hearing your guys' thoughts about the stories therein. Without further ado, I will let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I will see you guys again at the end of the video. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, roughly 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My hometown was once famed for being the pottery capital of America. Unfortunately, due to changing times, the city's glory days are long gone now. I was about 16 years old at the time this happened, and was attending the local high school. Also, at the same time, there was a performing arts school that had opened nearby. I was attending some of the weekend classes there, and made new friends with some of the students who attended that art school. One October, a group of us decided to get together. There were 5 of us in total. The majority of the students who attended this school lived at least a half hour away from the school itself. That meant it was up to me to find something we could all do together, since I was the most familiar with the area. There's an Ohio State Park in my city near the outskirts. This park has many famous tales surrounding it, from the death of a woman who was left at the altar, to the killing of Pretty Boy Floyd, who was an American gangster and bank robber. It's most notoriously known, though, for Gretchen's lock, which is a dam system that was built around 1836 or so. The lock system is named after the man who built it lost his daughter due to an illness at sea. His daughter was supposedly buried there for many years, although her body has since been removed. Many say her spirit still lingers in the area, searching for her mother or something. Regardless, it was October, and that seemed like the perfect place to go. The group consisted of myself, Amanda, Beth, Sarah, and Abby. We had all piled into Abby's car, a brand new Dodge Durango. We all packed into the vehicle and headed off to the park. The park setting is down a very large hill, nestled right up against a creek. That was why the dam was needed in the first place. There was also a mill house, horse trails, walking paths, campsites, and many other picturesque features. Well, during the day, that is. There's an ominous feel there at night, almost as if you're being watched. Granted, we were teenagers. We weren't really there for the hunt as much as we were there to catch a buzz. Luckily for us, Amanda had brought the good stuff. We were all excited to listen to music and get stoned in the dark and just enjoy ourselves. We smoked and smoked and smoked. You could have cut through the fog with a knife, that's how thick it was. We were listening to the latest Metro Station CD. Mind you, this was 2011 or so. At some point, Abby opened the door to get a breath of fresh air. I was sitting in between Amanda and Sarah, and Beth and Abby were in the front. It was pitch black outside, and there was little to no light produced by the single street light located in the middle of the parking lot, about 100 feet away from where we were. I remember Sarah kept mentioning that she heard leaves crunching from outside somewhere. We told her to not mind, and that it was all in her head from smoking so much weed. After about 15 minutes of Sarah having a panic attack, she tried to calm herself down. We agreed to turn off the music for a moment and hear Sarah out. We were there sitting in silence except for the occasional flick of a lighter. But what we heard next left all of us sitting upright in our seats. We could hear leaves breaking for sure, and a strange rustling noise. It sounded like it was a good distance away, though. I told Sarah not to worry, probably just some animal. After about 5 minutes of us sitting in silence, I started telling the spooky story about the young girl. The others made me stop because they were getting a bit too freaked out. Abby said that she was too afraid to drive out of the park, and she needed to find a happy place so she could start navigating the dark roadways back to the main road. I was about to get up, get outside, and light up a cigarette when Sarah sat up and put her hand on my leg. Her eyes were the size of 50-cent pieces. She leaned in and whispered to me, "I heard something right outside." I laughed it off and told her there was nothing to worry about. But what happened next I'll remember forever. Abby went to start the car, which had no response. The engine didn't turn over. That freaked us out, considering it was a brand new car. Abby tried to start the car again and again, but nothing, just the sound of the failed ignition. With the third attempt, you could hear the engine echoing throughout the surrounding hills as it attempted to start. Abby turned on her headlights to see what was going on. The blood-curdling screams that followed I'll never forget. All of us, including myself, screamed at the top of our lungs in shock and horror. We could see that surrounding the entire vehicle a little ways away were men and women dressed in all black, wearing ski masks. They were holding deceased cats and raccoons up by their tails, displaying them slit right down the middle. Abby threw the vehicle into reverse, not knowing what to do. As soon as the vehicle began to back up, the men and women standing around us began to approach and started yelling and screaming. They even reached us and began banging on the vehicle, smacking the windows and kicking the tires, as if we were in the middle of some kind of riot. The banging and pounding stopped, and everything was eerily quiet. We could see that they were all still there, though, observing us. As Abby backed out of the parking spot, some of them removed their black masks, revealing eerie and smug smiles. They all seemed to be very happy about whatever it is they were doing. Abby hauled ass, navigating through the twisting roads that led out of the park. When we were finally almost out, we stopped at a stop sign. We all came out of our fear-induced comas and started talking about what the hell we'd just witnessed. That was when 2 feet slammed down in the hood of the SUV. A man had jumped out of nowhere onto it. Pure panic caused Abby to slam down on the accelerator, causing the man on the hood to slip over and slam into the windshield, completely shattering it. He rolled off the top moments later. Traveling at what felt like the speed of light, we hauled ass out of that valley where the park was located and pulled into an upscale residential neighborhood. I immediately got out of the SUV and lit a cigarette to calm my nerves. We shared our thoughts about what happened. I was speechless and felt horrible for taking them there at all. Once I was dropped off, I never spoke to Abby or the rest of the girls again. I think they had some PTSD from the events of that night. I know that Abby told her father that she hit a deer that night in an attempt to explain the damage to the hood and windshield. I don't believe we'll ever get to the bottom of what happened, but further research shows there was some sort of cult activity in the area around that time. What we experienced there ended up being much scarier than the ghost story I had initially planned to tell that night. I signed up for Uber Eats back when it was really gaining traction in 2021. I'd just gotten laid off from my previous job, and it seemed nearly impossible to find any other job quickly. This was a bit of a risk that I really hoped would work out. A couple of months in, I was enjoying it well enough, and it was paying me enough for me to keep at it. This happened just around a year after I'd started. I'd fallen into the habit of waking up late and staying up late. so I hadn't started working until around dinner time. By 11 p.m., I still hadn't made enough to be good for the night, so I continued on taking pretty much any order that popped up. It was around 1 a.m. or so when an order came through that was pretty interesting. It was a grocery order from a 24-hour 7-Eleven gas station. I accepted it, but it was just odd to me. Why would someone need groceries from a gas station in the middle of the night? I drove up and parked at the mostly empty station. I went into the convenience store. The only person inside was a kind old man working the register. I picked up the bag from him and also got myself a cup of coffee for the road. I got in and situated myself before backing out and getting on the road for the final stretch of the drive. Only a moment after getting onto the main street, though, I noticed a car's headlights right behind me. Mind you, this was very late and almost no cars were out and about. I was sure I would have seen them before they were so close to me. After some thinking, I thought they must have been at the gas station as well, maybe parked around the side of the building. They must have pulled out as soon as I did. I drove along this same road for a while, reaching the edge of town. That was when I suddenly felt something was wrong with my car. It was behaving way bumpier than usual, and a loud scraping sound was coming from the right side. After a minute from noticing this, it became a lot worse, so bad that I had to pull off to the side before the car would break down in the road. I parked on the shoulder, with woods on either side of me. In the mirror, I saw the headlights of that same car, slowing down and pulling in right behind me. Unsure what was going on, I decided to get out quickly and see what the problem was. I didn't know if the car behind me was going to try to help me out, or if they had something else in mind. All I knew was I couldn't go anywhere until I figured out what the problem was. I ran around to the other side of my vehicle and quickly noticed the problem. The right tire was completely flattened, which was crazy because I hadn't run over anything. Usually, flat tires happen gradually, not just suddenly like that. I took a closer look and saw a gash on the right side that didn't look natural at all. I heard a door open from the car from behind. A man stepped out and waved at me. "I'm all right, thank you," I called out, trying to get them to leave before even approaching, especially after realizing this was all really sketchy. The man kept walking toward me. Once he got about 10 feet away, I could see him much more clearly. He was older, with long gray and black hair and a bushy, untamed beard. He wore basic clothes, jeans and a hoodie, but they were covered in stains and grime. He came right up next to my car and asked if he could help me out, showing a big smile. I said once again that I was okay, but he only laughed and looked at my tire, then back at me. A few seconds of awkward silence passed as the man held his eerie smile. I lied and said a friend was already on his way to pick me up. Having rejected his help 3 times now, the man's smile fell into a straight face. He turned his body toward the car and very unnaturally looked around. This is when I got the immediate rush through my body to get away from this man. I only had one option to do so. I bolted off the road into the tree line, hearing the man follow me into the pitch-black woods. It only lasted for a few seconds before I lost him. After that, I didn't go very far at all. I was still able to see the headlights on the road, and I could make out the man's figure moving around by the cars. A few minutes later, he got back into his vehicle and left. By now, I had enough time to pretty much figure out that this had all been a setup from the beginning. From the Uber Eats order to having been followed from the gas station, where he likely slashed my tire. I didn't think it would be so easy to catch him, but his full name and everything on the app turned out to be his actual information. I guess he didn't think that we would have tied it all back to his Uber Eats order. That being said, his punishment wasn't exactly very harsh, because he didn't get the opportunity to harm me. He only stole some things from my vehicle. I'm sure that if I'd stayed there on the road, though, I might not even be here to share this today. This story takes place when I was an elementary school student. It was September, but it was still very hot. That day, heavy rain began to fall, though. I walked home after school with two friends who were in the same grade as me and lived close by. I remember the sky was a solid gray color. It was very dark out. Whenever there was heavy rain forecast or bad weather coming like typhoons, I would always get excited by unusual feelings of, danger, anticipation, whatever you call it. That day, as I was heading home, I was messing around and making more noise than usual, playing around in the puddles in the rain. I lived in a relatively urban area in Nagoya. There were many hills, and there was an incline on the way I walked to school every day. That meant there was a decline on my way home. Because of the hills, there were these streams of water running down them, flowing very fast down toward the ditches and drains. It was amazing how the scenery had changed so drastically. The gutters at the side of the roads were clogged up, and rushing water was running down. At points, we could see them clogged up with various debris. I decided to lay a stick flat in the flowing water to see what it would do. Other times, I tried to poke at the leaves to create space for the water to drain downward. We were getting closer to our homes now. I was thinking about how it had felt like a little adventure. That was when we discovered something interesting. One of the drain covers appeared to be open. We could see inside. We all gathered around and looked downward. I was amazed by how fast the water was rushing down. It was way faster than I would have ever imagined. The drainway was huge. I guessed it was some kind of storm drain. It almost looked like a water slide at the pool. I quickly threw a stone and watched it get sucked in. Wow, that's amazing! It was really fun to see it get washed away in the blink of an eye. We played there for a while, chucking different things we found into the open drain mouth, when all of a sudden we heard someone tell us to try an umbrella. We were getting a little tired of throwing small things in there like sticks and stones and leaves, so we immediately went with this idea. We had been using umbrellas that day and I didn't want to get wet, so I didn't offer mine. I saw one of my friends had begun to close his umbrella with a smile on his face. I'll do it, but if I lose my umbrella, my mom will kill me. I'll just have to hold on to it. He aimed his umbrella into the storm drain, and almost instantly he began to shout in panic. The force of the water that was rushing almost swept him away immediately. The umbrella opened up a little as it hit the water. The water rushed in and opened it more, and it quickly yanked him off his feet and began to drag him down into the drain. We all grabbed at our friend. It was so scary. I managed to grab a hold of his leg, and two of my other friends managed to get a hold of him too. We heard a voice yelling from behind us. I knew the voice belonged to an adult, but I didn't expect to see our school's vice principal running over towards us. My friend, probably alerted by the sound of his voice, let go of his umbrella, and the umbrella was swept away in the blink of an eye. We could hear the sound of the metal spines cracking and breaking in the drain. The vice principal joined us at that moment, and he looked incredibly angry. He started yelling at us, saying what were we thinking, and that we couldn't play like that here since it was so dangerous. After being scolded by the vice principal, a man who we barely interacted with, we scattered off home with our tails between our legs. When I got home, I told my mother about what happened. For some reason, I was really excited to tell her, I remember. She looked annoyed and asked me where it happened. I said down the hill near our road. She looked angry with me. I knew I probably shouldn't talk to her about it again. My brother was in the same room as us and had just heard our conversation. I asked him if he knew why Mom was so angry. He told me that about 8 years ago, on a day just like today, where rain was falling constantly. A boy of about our age was walking home alone. He never made it home, though. He vanished. Parents and teachers searched all over for him, but all they could find was his rucksack nearby in a ditch. Several hours later, his body was discovered, a few hundred meters from where his bag was found. He'd somehow been sucked into a storm drain and been washed away by the force of the rushing water. They said his body was completely mangled from being battered against the walls. Apparently, the vice principal was the one who found him that time. My brother wasn't surprised that he was so angry and yelling at us. Lots of people in our area had heard of the incident, including my parents. Our house phone began to ring. My mother answered it in the other room, and I found out later the vice principal was calling to see if I'd made it home all right. He was very worried about us. He said he had seen us playing with the exact storm drain the missing student's backpack was found next to. He found it disturbing the storm drain was open at all, because since the first accident, safety measures had been taken to make sure it would remain shut at all times. I told my mom that we hadn't opened the storm drain. It was already open by the time we got there, and someone had encouraged us to try and put the umbrella in. If the vice principal hadn't come rushing over that day, then I don't know if my friend would have been able to let go of his umbrella. I feel like he saved us from a terrible incident. My friend could have ended up like that poor boy who got sucked down into the drain. Needless to say that when my dad got home, both of my parents gave me a very long lecture about the dangers of playing with a drain. I vowed I would never go near one again. I told my friends about the story my brother had told me, and we agreed that we were glad the vice principal was there for us and that no one got hurt. There was one thing that was left unanswered, though. None of us students that were there was the one who said to try an umbrella when we were messing around, throwing things into the storm drain. I know it wasn't me who said that, and my friends were adamant it wasn't any of them either. Whenever it rains, I can't help but remember that phrase egging us on, and I wonder why they chose to do that day. I wonder if the vice principal is still out there, keeping an eye on children making their ways home. It was very nice of him to be there to watch over us. This took place during the early 1990s. I was around 10 or 11 at the time. My family and I lived in a rural area near Kansas City. This particular area is very different nowadays compared to what it was like back in the 90s. Back in the day, it had a very country-like atmosphere. We lived just off a gravel road, and traffic was very sporadic. And typically, the only people who drove down our road at all were the people who lived there. There were only a few houses on our street at the time. Across the street from the house that we moved into was a big cornfield with a few trees. There were a couple of boys my age who lived in the same neighborhood, and we all thought it would be fun to build a tree house or a fort of some kind. I was across the street almost every day. My friends would usually walk to my house, and then we would go across the street to play in the fort. Think of that scene in the 1990s miniseries Stephen King's It, where the Losers Club was building that dam in the river. It was a lot like that. One day, I was across the street with one of the other boys when we noticed a small blue car driving up and down the street over and over, very slowly. Since our road was very narrow and gravelly, it wasn't unusual for cars to drive down it carefully, but this car in particular was driving extremely slow. I noticed the driver would look out his window and sort of eyeball us every time he drove by. I saw him at least 2 or 3 more times that afternoon. I remember thinking he was probably curious about our playhouse, or that perhaps he was lost and contemplating asking for directions. After a while, my friend had to take off though, leaving me there all by myself. Not long after my friend had left, I saw that same blue car driving down our street once again. This time, though, he came to a stop. The driver just sat there and stared at me for quite a while. I began to get this very uneasy feeling about him. Even at that age, I knew all about stranger danger. I began to feel like something bad was going to happen. I could hear my dad's words echoing in my head. If a stranger ever tries to grab you, you run as fast as you can and scream your head off. I started thinking about which direction to run off to. I knew that if I ran in the opposite direction, I would be running into a cornfield that was at least a mile wide in every direction. If I ran towards my house, I would have to cross the street, meaning I would have to pass the creepy guy in the car. The situation terrified me. I could feel my heartbeat escalating as I tried to decide what the hell I should do. While deciding on what direction would give my best chance of escaping, I saw the man reach down for something. I never saw what exactly he was reaching down for, but something in my gut told me that if I didn't take off right now, I would be history. I saw the driver's side door open just a crack. I knew my dad was home at the time, so I decided to make a break for it. I knew I was going to have to cross the street right past the man's car, so I began running as fast as I could alongside the road, opposite of where the man's car was facing. I could see out of the corner of my eye that the man had closed his driver's side door once I arrived at the road. The driver put his car in reverse. If I had been a second slower, I wouldn't have made it. The trunk of his car barely missed me as he started to reverse. I darted across the street into my driveway. I began screaming as loud as I could as I ran to my house. My dad immediately came outside and met me in the driveway. When I turned around to show my dad the man in the car, he had already fled. All I could see was a large cloud of dust rising off the gravel road as the man in the blue car sped out of there. I remember that night I had a nightmare, running down a seemingly endless gravel road, panting, sweating, and terrified. I would look back and see the blue car getting closer and closer. I woke up my parents, as apparently I had been yelling in my sleep. I had to sleep in their room for a while. Eventually, the night terrors did stop, though. This happened nearly 2 decades ago, but I can still remember it very well. I have no doubt in my mind that the man in the blue car was the monster that your parents tell you about when you're a kid. If I had not run off when I did, I would likely be nothing but a statistic today. I would occasionally hear stories about other kids who went missing in my area during the 90s. I would often wonder if the man in the blue car had anything to do with it. Now I understand why my dad always told me to run and scream. And someday I'll be instructing my own kids to do the same. I was taking a few days off, spending it camping in the woods. I was in some forest a few hours from my town, and had set up camp at the end of a 4-hour trail. I'd spent the night there already, and had noticed this thin path leading out from the campsite. I had no idea where it went, and it wasn't on the map of the area either. Having nothing better to do on that second day, I thought I'd go for a short trek down that mysterious path and see if it led anywhere cool. Maybe a small pond or a waterfall or something. I brought with me a backpack with food and water in case I'd be out longer than expected. Walking through this trail, it was very obvious that almost nobody used it, or at least they hadn't done so in a very long time, maybe even multiple years. It was very thin and overgrown in a lot of sections, and I didn't see any signs of people at all, not even an old shoe print or anything. This went on for several miles, taking around 2 hours before I finally found the end. And at that end wasn't what I expected either. There was a house or cabin of some sort, sitting in the middle of the woods. Even at first sight, there was no mistaking that it was abandoned. Moss and vines were growing out of the wood, and the doors and windows were all open. Before approaching any further, I looked around at my surroundings, checking for anything. Obviously, this wasn't exactly a normal thing to just stumble across. The woods were calm and somewhat unsettling. Still, I went up to the doorway and poked my head in, looking down the front hallway. There were dust and debris lying all over the floors. It was otherwise completely barren. I went in a little further. It smelled of mildew and rotting wood, but as I crept through the rooms, there wasn't much to see. Feeling uneasy, though, I was about to turn around and leave when a small glimmer caught the corner of my eye. On one of the closed wooden doors, the handle had been ripped off, and it had been replaced by a silver padlock. It almost looked brand new and matched nothing else in the home. My curiosity immediately had me thinking, why is there a padlock on this door in this otherwise empty and completely ruined cabin? The more I looked at it, though, the more that uneasy feeling took me over. I couldn't bring myself to investigate. I quickly left the house and went back to the path. Just as I entered the trail again, though, I heard a single footstep on the wooden floor inside of the home. I turned and looked at the doorway, but I didn't see anything there. I kept on walking, trying to distance myself from that place. As I walked back, though, for the whole 2 hours, I kept hearing footsteps in the distance, like someone was following me. The trees densely covered the area, making it impossible to see far enough to tell who it was. When I got back to camp, I got a fire going early. I just sat and waited, listening and looking to see if anybody showed up at all. By nightfall, I hadn't really heard anything else. As the hours started to get later, though, I began hearing it again. Footsteps out in the distance, far beyond the light of my campfire. Definitely close enough for them to see the light, though. It went on for several hours, hearing a line of footsteps every 10 to 15 minutes. Still, though, I was never able to see this person. Eventually, it got so late that I knew I had to go to sleep. I left my campfire going as I climbed inside my tent. I was in and out of sleep for the rest of the night, waking up at every small sound the woods made. After getting almost no sleep, I left. What was that cabin doing there? Why did whoever was inside follow me the entire night? I'll never know. I can't say I know what the person intended to do, but their disturbing stalking behavior only lets me assume the worst. I can never seem to stop thinking about the disturbing possibilities of what was behind that mysterious locked door. This is a scary experience I had with my brother. On the night this took place, my brother and I had decided to go watch a movie at the cinema. The only issue was, the movie was not screening in our town. We would have to drive kind of far. We didn't really care, though, as we were pretty young. I think I was about 16, and my brother was about 19 or so. When you're that age, you feel like you have all the time in the world. It was just over an hour's drive away, and the only showing was at night. We got there on time and watched our movie. Then we had some dinner at a fast food place. We hit the road at about 11 p.m. or so and started driving, making our way back home. It had been a pretty great night so far. My brother was driving and I was in the passenger seat. We were using satellite navigation since we were driving along unfamiliar roads. Although it was kind of a long drive and pretty late out, we had plenty to talk about. We were talking about the movie, food, and various other things. Just for some context, we were driving back to our hometown in Kagawa from Tokushima. The navigation system, as a result, was leading us in a different direction from the way we came. It seemed to be taking us away from the highways. I imagine this was either to avoid some accident on the road or because of some late-night reworks. It wasn't great, though, because we'd been on National Route 11 before, and that ran alongside the sea. It was incredibly well lit, and the roads were very wide. Now we were going to be going through winding, narrow mountain passes. As you can imagine, we ended up getting a little lost. My brother and I didn't exactly know the roads we were going down, and we couldn't really figure out which way to go. I mean, the sat-nav wasn't exactly helping us. We were young and felt as if the sat-nav knew better, so we made the choice to follow its directions exactly. That turned out to be a very bad choice. We headed further into the darkness of the mountains and away from the bright lights of civilization. We tried to reassure one another that we were probably being sent on a shortcut of some sort and everything would be perfectly fine. We relied on the sat-nav's direction until the last of the streetlights disappeared. There was nothing but darkness ahead of us and all around us. I started to get more than a little worried. I said to my brother, "This is a little strange, isn't it?" "The sat-nav says it's fine," my brother replied. He couldn't hide his look of concern from me, though. I could see it written all over his face. Dark thickets of trees towered on either side of the road as our car chugged up higher into the mountains. Because we were now on uneven roads, the car was making some very strange noises, which began to panic me. It sounded like the engine was really struggling. I swallowed my pride and said to my brother, "Hey, I gotta be honest with you, I'm getting a little bit scared now. Why don't we make a U-turn and get back onto the highway?" My brother didn't respond, though. He was fixated on the road ahead. My heart began to beat faster. I asked him the same question again, but he didn't say a word. I watched as his grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Hey bro, come on, you're scaring me." Just as I was about to ask him to make a U-turn for the third time, he drew in a deep breath and finally spoke. "Don't look behind us, but something strange is going on." I felt my spine turn to ice. I didn't even really understand what he meant. Why was he being so vague? Instinctively, I wanted to look behind me, but I did as he asked. I sat there in silent contemplation, unable to muster the courage to say another word for a while. I thought that my brother might be teasing me. We did like to prank one another, but neither of us had ever gone this far. It seemed way too serious. I looked over to see if he had a smirk on his face or something, but he was incredibly focused and incredibly concerned. When I saw the look of determination on his face, I knew there really must be something behind us. I noticed that we were speeding up now as well. My brother floored it. I felt myself slam backward into the passenger seat. It was terrifying. At any moment, another vehicle coming in the opposite direction could appear behind one of the bends in the mountain road. We were going way too fast. Whatever was going on was causing my brother to drive incredibly recklessly. I went against my brother's orders and looked into the wing mirror to see if I could find what was behind us. To my surprise, I didn't see anything at all. My brother had gone completely mad. I was silent. I wanted to plead with him to slow down, but I also didn't want to divert his attention from driving. Despite being on these dark, narrow roads, he drove faster and faster. I felt for sure we were going to collide with something at any moment. I braced myself. I tensed up when we were turning and skidded into a hard left. At that moment, I shut my eyes and braced for an impact. A second or two went by. I opened my eyes and looked over at my brother. His face had lost all of its color. His knuckles were white. It was as if he was hanging onto that steering wheel for dear life. I didn't dare make a sound. I just prayed we would get back onto some streets with lights and away from whatever was causing my brother to drive like this. I shut my eyes, feeling scared. After a few moments, though, my brother said, "It's okay now, he's not following us anymore. I think we're good." I opened my eyes to see streetlights in the distance. It was as if my prayers had been answered. We had turned off onto the national highway route again. I saw the sea. I knew when I saw that we were going to be fine. I can't tell you how relieved I was at that point. Once relief settled in, a new feeling emerged though. Curiosity. I needed to know what had caused my brother to act like that. I needed to know what had been following us, what had freaked him out. I asked him. My brother drew in a deep breath like he'd done before. He said that halfway into the mountain roads, he suddenly felt as if we were being tailed. At one point, the rear view sensor went off, and he didn't see anything behind us at first because of the darkness. That was when he took a closer look in the rear view mirror and realized that we were actually being tailed by a car with its lights off. He thought that whoever was driving must know the mountain roads well if they were confident enough to drive with no lights. At first, he was glad to see other cars using these roads, because he thought the sat-nav might actually be right. He said he felt uncomfortable though the car had its lights off. He wanted to pull over and let it pass, but the roads were too narrow to allow him to do so. It was at that point that he did a closer look into the mirror to try and see if he could figure out anything about the driver. He said the sight of him nearly took his breath away. Apparently, the driver turned the interior light of his car on for a brief moment. My brother could see his face. He was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile, but a disgusting grin with furrowed brows. The man behind us made an attempt to reach into his glove compartment. He said at that moment he knew we had to get away from that car and its driver. That was the moment he started driving faster. It made sense to me now why I hadn't seen anything when I looked in the wing mirror, and why my brother made that sudden screeching left turn. Apparently when he did that, the car behind us continued going on straight. We're not sure if the driver tried to turn around and follow us, but we don't think he did. We managed to drive home safely without any further incident. That experience really had an effect on my brother. He became a lot more anxious and jumpy. He sought out some help though, and thankfully I don't think it permanently scarred him or anything. My brother and I are fine these days, doing well with no injuries. That was one scary night though. I torture myself every now and then and think back to what that grinning driver's intentions were. I feel as if he must have been trying to shepherd us someplace, since he appeared to know the mountains well enough to drive in the dark, and he wasn't scared of showing his face for a moment. That's pretty unnerving. Makes me feel as if something more than a robbery might have been on the cards. But hey, your guess is as good as mine. In June of last year, I graduated from high school. I never had an easy time making new friends, but during quarantine, I got pretty close to a couple of old acquaintances of mine. Their names were Kevin and John. Physical description time. Kevin is a tall, fat kid with a ridiculously large head and short, unkempt brown hair. John is even taller than Kevin, around 6'4", very skinny with light brown hair and bad acne. They're both the type that always get into trouble, whether they're drinking, smoking, or busting into places. Even though I did some pretty sketchy shit sometimes, drinking and smoking wasn't really my thing. Despite that, they pressured me into hanging out with them, and for a time I sort of enjoyed their company. We got along pretty well because of our similar outlooks on the world. However, they could be real hypocrites sometimes. One time, I made the mistake of letting them drive my car. They drove it out into a place in the woods and peer pressured me into smoking. Looking back, I realize now that they were just using me for my vehicle. Call it a bad decision, but I'm not sure why exactly I didn't cut ties with them right there. The second incident is where things really started though. It was about a month ago. Despite everyone warning me not to hang out with them, I let them take me to a party. Since I was growing suspicious of them though, I took my own vehicle and followed them there. The first red flag was when they parked 2 streets away from where the party was taking place, but I didn't really think much of it at the time. We got to the address and were turned away immediately. Kevin tried to convince them to let us in, but it was useless. At that point, I knew something was up with Kevin and John. The next day, I decided enough was enough. I was tired of being around fake people, and I needed to cut them off. Since John didn't have a phone, I texted his girlfriend and told her to tell Kevin and John that I was done with them. That night, I got a Snapchat from John. "Yo, my girlfriend dumped me because of you, you fucking bitch," he said in all caps, followed by 3 middle finger emojis. I then got a message from Kevin which pretty much said the same thing. He called me the C word and warned me to stay away from him and John or else. I laughed to myself, thinking they wouldn't really do anything. After all, they'd admitted to me in the past that they weren't nearly as tough as they like to act. Here they were trying to threaten me. I got a kick out of it. I should not have let my guard down, though. That Friday, my mother, who has multiple sclerosis, spent the day in the hospital getting experimental medicine through an IV. My dad called me around 5 and said she was going through some side effects, but she would be okay. However, they would need to spend the night there, meaning I would be home alone. For the rest of that night, I did what I used to do every night before going to college. I stayed up for a while playing Madden with all the lights off. After one of my games, I decided to check Snapchat. Something in my gut told me to look at my Snap map in that moment. For those of you who aren't familiar with Snapchat, there's a map that shows you your friends' locations. Anyway, I checked, and my heart just about skipped a beat when I saw that Kevin and John were outside my house right now. As I was trying to calm myself down, I got a sudden call from my neighbor. When I picked up the phone, he was frantic. He told me he'd just seen 2 people jump my fence into my backyard. He and his wife had already called the police, and I needed to hide right now until they got there. I ran down the hall and into my room. I locked my door and hid in the closet. Shortly after, I heard the sounds of glass breaking and footsteps in the common area of my home. Luckily for me, I live right at the front of my neighborhood, just off the main road. There's usually a police car station just outside our neighborhood entrance looking for speeders. Because of that, they got there within about 2 minutes. I heard my front door being forced open, followed by multiple officers yelling at the intruders. Not long after, I heard a knock on my bedroom door and an officer announcing himself. He entered my room and told me it was safe now. One of the windows in the kitchen had been completely destroyed. Kevin and John were escorted out of my house in cuffs. My dad got home soon after and hugged me for at least a minute. He said my mom really didn't understand what was going on because of how loopy the medicine had made her. The next day, she came back home and broke down in tears. There's a lot of things about that incident that have been bothering me. The way I underestimated them, and the evil looks they gave me as they were escorted out. The one thing that will always stick with me, though, is what I heard the officer say when they entered my home. Drop the gun. It's terrifying knowing I could have been murdered by people I used to call my friends. The police told me that when they busted down the door, Kevin and John were in the foyer brandishing pistols. They believed that they were either waiting for me to come out of my room and attack me when I least expected it, or they had been planning to shoot me while I was laying on the couch playing video games. They told the police it was just meant to be a joke during interrogation, and John even laughed about it, but that was obviously bullshit to me. It just proved how sick and dangerous they were. I still haven't totally wrapped my head around the fact that things could have gone so much worse if my neighbors hadn't been so kind and caught them climbing my fence that night. It serves as a reminder to me to live life to the fullest and to always be kind to your neighbors. Kevin and John are currently awaiting trial for breaking and entering and attempted assault. They also got slapped with drug charges because of all the narcotics that were found in their car. I'll forever be grateful to my neighbors for saving my life that night. My brother Jason and I moved out to Colorado several years back. We both wanted to live by the mountains, but neither of us could afford to on our own. So we split the rent on a townhome in the suburbs, right outside of Denver. This worked out perfectly because we were only 10 to 15 minutes away from a huge line of mountains. One thing I will mention about these nearby hiking and camping trails, though, is that they're pretty packed. It's so accessible to everyone around and to tourists that at almost any time of year it's hard to find any solitude. Because of this, me and my brother decided to plan a 3-day backpacking trip that would take us away from the crowd of people and hopefully give us some peace and quiet. I trusted him to route out our trip. A couple of weeks later, we drove down to the trailhead. Only one other car was parked there when we arrived, an old-looking SUV covered in dust. It looked like it had been through a rough drive. Seeing as it was likely only one other person was hiking this route, we went in with a positive attitude. The first day of backpacking was an 8-mile hike. Most of the terrain was actually quite flat until we got to the last couple of miles. There, we started going up a mountainside. It was pretty tiring, but Jason promised that the campsite would all be worth it. It turned out he wasn't lying at all. About 3/4 of the way up the mountain, there was a small flat area right on the side of a cliff. It had a beautiful view of the entire valley. It was stunning, especially with the sun starting to set. After taking in the view, we started pitching up our tents and gathered some sticks and stones to make a fire pit with. Once the fire was going, we sat down and just talked for a while. I don't even have any idea how long we were talking for, at least 2 hours or something, when we both heard something from the trail. We instantly went silent, listening as footsteps started making their way towards our campsite. A minute later, a man emerged from the darkness and into the far light coming from our fire. He wasn't wearing a headlamp, which every hiker and camper knows is an absolute must. As he walked up, I think both Jason and I knew something was wrong. He had a grin on his face as he approached the campfire. "Hey, did you need something?" Jason asked, standing up. The man looked at Jason, then at me. He kept his grin as he started to explain that he was a park ranger and he had been following our trail for a while. He said the section had been closed off for the season and we couldn't be here. Something was really off, though. We knew this park was open, and we had even gotten permits from the state the day prior to camping out there. We also knew that park rangers would not be in the middle of a mountain trail at night. If he wasn't who he said he was, though, then what was he doing out here? I could tell Jason's mind was racing too. We both looked at the man and started asking questions, but he cut us off quickly. "You both need to leave with me right now. Pack up and follow me. I'll lead you guys back to the trailhead." We stood there in silence for a moment, taking in what he just said. We realized there was something seriously wrong here. The man stayed still by the fire, with that same eerie grin on his face. "No, we're staying here," Jason said. The man looked at him, then again at me, keeping that same eerie grin. He just turned around and walked away. Terrified, we didn't even speak for a few minutes, just listening to make sure he didn't come back. We grabbed more dry sticks and rekindled the fire. Neither of us were sleeping. We stayed up the entire night, sometimes hearing the man's footsteps again, but never actually seeing him. Once the sun was up, we packed and left, cutting our trip short and retracing the trail back to our car. When we got back, that same dusty SUV was there. That got us both wondering if that hiker had run into the same man as us, and what had happened to them. We notified the police, but ultimately found nothing out of it. There was no doubt the man was lying about being a park ranger, but the fact that he tried to lead us out into the woods in the middle of the night means he was likely trying something horrible. What that was, we don't know, but it seems like the other hiker may have been unfortunate enough to find out. It was 2 a.m. and I was quite bored. I went out to this park a bit out of town to do some biking. It, for the most part, is surrounded by trees at all ends, with a running/biking track that goes around the park. The park was lined with streetlights, so you could very vaguely see. I would go there a few times a week, around the same time, because it unwinded me and felt good outside at that time. This time, when I was making my rounds, though, I was surprised when I saw 4 6-year-old looking figures emerging from the forest. At least, they looked to be small children. There were 4 to 7 of them. I don't quite remember exactly how many, but more began to emerge. These little silhouettes didn't have a parent with them, though, and all stayed in the darkness, remaining as silhouettes. I was biking in their general direction when they started coming towards me. Thankfully, I was about 200 feet away from them. The spooky little shits began running at me. I don't think I've ever biked faster in my entire life. I literally became Lance Armstrong for a good 3 minutes, charging it home. It was unexplainable. I was alone, and I've been alone there before. I've never seen a single other person all the other times I've gone. I haven't gone since then either, needless to say. I hope this belongs here. This happened about 5-ish years ago. I was spending the night at my friend's house with another friend as well. It was summer, so we slept with the windows wide open, and she didn't have a screen on her window. We lived in an extremely safe area though, so we didn't really even think twice about it. I slept right next to the window, with my phone on the windowsill. I used a sleep recording app on my phone, because I was known to talk in my sleep a lot, and it was interesting to hear what various things I would say. Also important to note that we were completely home alone that night. This time, however, my phone caught a man's voice in the recording as well. The first thing that could be heard was what sounded like a grunt. Our window was high up, not second story high though, but it was a real effort to climb into. We could hear a man climbing in, and then at the very end of the recording, we could hear the man whispering, "Oh God, something is wrong." Thank heavens nothing else happened that night. We weren't sure who the hell it could have been. It sounded like a fully grown man, and as I mentioned, no one else was home that night. I never slept over at her house again after that, which I felt a bit bad for. She was absolutely petrified to even sleep in her room again. She also never slept with her window open again, obviously. We don't know why the man climbed in through the window. Maybe he thought it was his buddy's house or something, but then saw 3 teenage girls there together. I'm not exactly sure. What I do know is that thankfully he didn't do anything else to us that night, but I still get goosebumps listening to that recording. I refuse to sleep with windows even slightly open, and I live nowhere near that place now. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible. to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.